My mom has this tattoo too. The little girl spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as if she was afraid the words would vanish if she said them any louder. The mafia boss stopped mid-step. The room had been noisy just a second earlier, the clink of glasses, the rough laughter of men. But all of it drained away in an instant when he turned back toward her. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, a thin coat, worn-out shoes, a messy tumble of red hair. Yet those blue eyes were strangely calm for a child who had no place in a room like this. "What did you just say?" he asked, weighing every word with care. The girl tugged up her sleeve, just enough to reveal a small tattoo near her wrist. A black rose, faded, imperfect, hand done with a crude needle. The same tattoo he had carried on his own body since he was young, marked into his skin on the night he proposed to the only woman he had ever loved, the woman he had personally ordered killed. His breath caught in his throat. No one knew that symbol. No one was allowed to know it and still be alive, because the woman who bore that tattoo had died years ago. "Where did you see it?" he asked, and his voice suddenly trembled. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "My mom has it too. Mom said it means true love never dies. It just waits." The mafia boss felt the floor tilt beneath his feet, because that sentence, word for word, was exactly what he had once said to her, the night he went down on one knee, slipped the ring onto her finger, and promised he would love her for the rest of his life. Then years later, he gave the order to kill her. But if Harper was dead, then where did this child come from? And why was she carrying a secret he had buried along with the love he thought he'd destroyed? Stay until the end. Because what the little girl reveals next will expose a secret the mafia boss has been running from for years. A secret that could redeem him or destroy him completely. Before we begin, if you love stories that touch the heart, please hit like to support me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories. And if this story moves you, please share it with the people you love. Now we begin. The room sank into silence, not the natural kind that comes when conversation fades. This was a silence sharp as a blade, cutting through every sound, every breath, every thought. The men seated around the table were the kind who had killed without blinking, who had watched blood spill and still enjoyed their dinner. But now, no one dared to move because they'd just witnessed something that hadn't happened in years. Rocco Bianchi, the boss of the most powerful family on the East Coast, the man whose name made this whole city tremble, had just been robbed of his voice by a 7-year-old child. Gino Moretti was the first to react, Rocco's right hand for years. The man who had watched his boss step over blood and corpses without a flicker of hesitation. Gino moved forward, his hand sliding by instinct inside his suit jacket, where the pistol rested snug in its leather holster. His eyes locked on the little girl as if he were measuring a threat. A 7-year-old thin, clothes worn and shabby. But in this world, Gino knew death could come in any form, even the form of a small angel with hair red as fire. But before Gino could draw, a finger lifted. Just one finger. Rocco didn't even turn to look. He didn't need to. Years working together meant Gino understood his boss's smallest gestures better than he understood his own wife. One raised finger meant stop. Immediately. No questions, no explanation. Gino froze where he stood, his hand still on the grip of the gun, but he didn't dare pull it free. He stared at Rocco, trying to read something in that familiar face, but what he saw made the blood in his veins turn cold. Rocco Bianchi, the man Gino had always believed didn't know fear, was trembling. Not from rage, not from the cold. This was the trembling of a man who'd just watched a ghost from his past step into daylight. Rocco drew in a deep breath. Then he spoke, his voice low and slow, each word as if he had to force it up and out of his throat. "Get out." No one moved. The men glanced at one another, confused. They'd never been given an order like this. "Leave the room. Leave the boss alone with a strange child who had appeared out of nowhere. Get out, all of you." Rocco's voice rose, but it was still controlled. Still, the voice of a man used to commanding, used to being obeyed without needing to repeat himself a second time. Gino stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Rocco could hear. Boss, let me stay. We don't know who this girl is, where she came from, who sent her here. Rocco turned. His eyes met Gino's, and in that instant Gino saw something he'd never seen in years. Pain. Pure and brutal. The kind of pain a man buries beneath armor made of steel for years, waiting for the smallest crack to erupt like a volcano. Get out. This time, it wasn't an order. It was a plea. Gino had never heard Rocco beg for anything from anyone. He backed away one step, then turned to the others and gave a short nod. One by one they stood, chairs scraped across the wooden floor, dry and harsh in the stillness. They left without speaking, carrying with them looks filled with questions and unease. The door closed behind the last man. A soft click of the lock sounded like a final period, sealing off the outside world. Now there was only Rocco and the little girl. He stood there staring at the child in the middle of that luxurious private room, out of place like a wildflower growing up through rubble. Her thin coat wasn't warm enough for a New York night. Her worn canvas shoes were scuffed, one of them torn at the toe, but those blue eyes weren't afraid. They looked straight at him, calm, waiting, as if the girl had been preparing for this moment her entire short life. And maybe she had. Rocco walked to the bar in the corner of the room and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He needed something to hold on to, something familiar, while the whole world spun out of control around him. With the cold glass in his hand, he turned back to face the little girl. He tried to control his voice, tried to become the Rocco Bianchi everyone knew, cold, calculating, never letting emotion take the wheel. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was steadier now, but something unsettled still lived deep beneath it. The girl lifted her head, red hair falling along both sides of her narrow shoulders. "Nora! Nora!" "What?" "Nora Quinn. Quinn. An ordinary last name." It didn't connect to any family in the underworld Rocco knew. Not Lombardi. Not Romano. Not any enemy waiting out there in the dark. Just Quinn. The kind of name belonging to ordinary people living ordinary lives. But that tattoo wasn't ordinary. That sentence wasn't ordinary. And the blue eyes watching him weren't ordinary either. Rocco had looked into eyes like those before, years ago, in another life. "What's your mother's name?" The question escaped him before he could stop it, before the rational part of him could warn that there were questions better left unasked. There were answers better left unknown. The girl went quiet for a moment. Those blue eyes blinked, as if she were deciding whether she should say it or not. Then she opened her mouth, and each word fell like stones. Harper. Harper Quinn. The glass shattered. Rocco didn't remember if he dropped it or crushed it in his hand. He only heard the crack of breaking glass, felt cold liquid and something warmer running down his fingers. Blood. He was bleeding, but he couldn't feel the pain. He couldn't feel anything at all except that name echoing inside his head like a death bell. Harper Quinn. Harper. The name he tried to bury for years. The name he didn't allow anyone to speak in his presence. The name even those closest to him avoided like a plague. Because every time he heard it, Rocco saw her. Hair red as fire, eyes deep blue, that smile tilting to one side when she teased him, and then that face dissolving, replaced by the photographs Frankie had brought him. A body burned black, unrecognizable, nothing left but ash and what had once been the woman he loved. He'd cried that night, alone in this room with this same whiskey, and he swore he'd never cry again. "Are you okay?" The girl's voice pulled Rocco back into the present. He looked down at his hand. Blood was dripping onto the polished wooden floor, mixing with whiskey and shards of glass. He should have felt pain, but he didn't. Nothing could hurt more than what was tearing him apart inside his chest right now. Harper Quinn. He repeated the name as if saying it out loud might make it more real or less. "Your mother's name is Harper Quinn." "Quinn is my mom's maiden name," Nora said, her voice small but clear. "Quinn is my dad's last name. Dad is Wyatt." Wyatt Quinn, a man Rocco had never heard of. A man who had married Harper, given her a new name, a new life. Maybe even the happiness Rocco had never been able to give her. It felt like someone was squeezing his heart until it couldn't breathe. Not out of jealousy, not out of rage, but out of the sudden realization that for years, while he'd lived in the hell of guilt and regret, Harper had been alive. She had lived, had loved someone else, had built a family, had given birth to this child. The woman he thought he'd killed, the woman he'd mourned in the dead of night, the woman whose shadow haunted him in every dream and every nightmare hadn't died. Harper Quinn was still alive, or at least she had been, and that truth should have made him feel relief. But it didn't. It only made everything heavier by 1,000 times. Because if Harper had been alive all these years, why had she never come back? Why had she left him to drown in guilt? And more than anything else, why was she sending her daughter to find him now? Rocco stepped toward the little girl, forgetting the blood running down his hand, forgetting the shards of glass still lodged in his skin. He dropped to one knee, letting it touch the floor so his eyes were level with those blue eyes, Harper's eyes. Now that he was close, he saw everything. That shade of blue, that depth, the way they looked straight at whoever stood before them without flinching, without looking away. Nora was Harper's child. There was no doubt left. "Your mother," he said, his voice rough and raw. "Where is your mother now?" Nora didn't answer right away. She lowered her head and stared at her torn shoes. For the first time since she'd walked into this room, the calm on her face cracked. Her lower lip trembled. Her small hand clenched the hem of her worn coat. "My mom." Nora's voice grew smaller, almost a whisper. "My mom is gone." Those 3 words hit Rocco like a fist to the chest. He'd prepared himself for so many possibilities. Harper alive and hiding. Harper alive and plotting revenge. Harper alive and ready to face him after years. But he hadn't prepared for this. Harper was gone. Gone again. One more time. "When?" he asked, his voice like wind slipping through a crack. "Days ago." Nora lifted her head, and Rocco saw tears pooled in those blue eyes. But they didn't fall. She was trying to be strong, trying not to cry, just like her mother. "My mom was sick for a long time." "What kind of sick?" "Cancer," Nora said. And the word left her mouth too easily, too practiced, as if she'd been forced to say it far too many times. "Lung cancer." "The doctor said Mom only had months, but Mom made it longer. She said she needed more time to get everything ready for me." Rocco felt as if someone had drained all the air out of the room. Cancer, months of fighting, alone with a little girl, while he sat here in this lavish restaurant, drinking expensive whiskey and running his criminal empire. Harper had survived the bullet he'd ordered fired into her. She'd escaped, built a new life, had a child, loved someone else. She'd done all of that, only to have sickness steal her life away. Rocco hadn't killed her, but she still died. And somehow, that was even more cruel than a bullet. He rose to his feet and stepped back, needing distance just to breathe. His back hit the wall. He let his body slide down until he was sitting on the floor among broken glass and a spill of whiskey. The posture of a mafia boss now looked no different from the posture of a defeated man. And maybe that was exactly what he was. "Are you okay?" Nora asked, moving closer. Rocco looked at her. 7 years old, her mother dead for days. Walking alone to meet a man she'd never even seen before. And now, instead of being comforted, she was worrying about him. This child was stronger than any man he'd ever met. "Your mom?" Rocco swallowed hard. Was she in pain? At the end, Nora thought for a moment, as if weighing whether she should tell the truth or tell a lie that might make him feel better. Then she chose the truth. "Yes, Mom was in a lot of pain, but she never cried in front of me. She only cried when she thought I was asleep." The girl paused, but I wasn't asleep. I heard everything. Rocco closed his eyes. Harper rose in his mind. Not the Harper from years ago, the proud, stubborn young girl. Not the Harper from years ago, the woman he betrayed, but a Harper he'd never known. A mother lying in a hospital bed in pain from cancer, still trying to hide her tears. So her daughter wouldn't be afraid. She died the way she'd lived, strong, proud, alone, and he hadn't been there. He hadn't been there for years. Why? Rocco opened his eyes and looked at Nora. Why did your mom send you here? Why now? Nora reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, wrinkled from being held too many times. Mom told me to give this to you, she said. Mom said you'd understand. Rocco looked at the envelope in the little girl's hand, but he didn't reach for it yet. Too many questions were spinning through his mind. Too many pieces still hadn't clicked into place. How did you get here? He asked, his voice still rough. Oregon is thousands of miles from New York. Nora looked at him, her blue eyes blinking lightly, as if the question was too simple to even need explaining. I took the bus by yourself? Yes. Rocco felt as if someone had punched him in the gut again. A 7-year-old child taking a bus alone from Oregon to New York, nearly 3,000 miles across an entire country. How many days were you traveling? Days, Nora said, calm as if she were talking about an ordinary school trip. I had to transfer 4 times. Portland to Salt Lake City to Denver, Denver to Chicago, then Chicago to here. Rocco didn't know what to say. He'd commanded a criminal empire, coordinated jobs worth millions of dollars, planned wars where men lived or died. But he wasn't sure he could do what this child had just done. Alone, 7 years old, days on buses with strangers. No one asked you anything. No one thought it was strange. A kid traveling alone? Yes, Nora admitted. A lady asked where I was going, where my parents were. I told her I was visiting my grandma in New York, and my mom was waiting at the bus station up ahead. She paused, thinking. Mom taught me how to talk to strangers. Don't say too much. Don't say too little. Just enough so they won't ask more. Harper. Of course it was Harper. Even while she was dying, she still thought of everything, still prepared her daughter for every step, still taught her how to survive in a world full of danger. What else did your mom teach you? Rocco asked, partly from curiosity, partly because he needed to hear about Harper, needed to know how she'd lived through these years. A lot. Nora sat down on the floor, right across from Rocco, as if this were a normal conversation between two people who'd known each other for years. Mom taught me to read maps when I was 5. Mom said, a map is the most important thing because if you know where you are, you're never really lost. The girl paused, her head tilting slightly to one side. Mom also taught me how to recognize dangerous people. Mom said bad people don't always look bad. Sometimes they smile really pretty, so you have to look at their eyes. Eyes don't know how to lie. Rocco swallowed hard. Harper had said something like that to him years ago, the first night they met. She'd looked straight into his eyes and said, I know you're dangerous, but your eyes don't want to hurt me. And she'd been right. At least back then, your mom. Rocco had to clear his throat before he could keep going. Did your mom say why you had to find me? Why me and not someone else? Nora looked at him, and for a moment Rocco saw her as much older than 7, as if her mother's burden had been placed onto her small shoulders. Mom said, I don't have anyone else. Grandma died before I was born. Dad Wyatt died years ago. No aunts or uncles. The girl paused and took a small breath. Mom said one day, I would need to find you, and when that day came, I'd know where to go. But you've never met me. How did you know how to get here? Mom gave me the address and a picture. Nora reached into her pocket again, this time pulling out a small photograph, faded from time. She handed it to Rocco. He took it, and his heart skipped a beat. In the photo was Rocco, younger, smiling. Beside him was Harper, her red hair caught in the wind, her head resting on his shoulder. They were standing on a pier with sunset behind them. It was the day he proposed to her. Harper had kept this picture for years. Through a marriage to another man, through pregnancy, childbirth, the fight against illness, she had still kept it. Mom looked at this picture every night, Nora said softly. I asked who it was. Mom said it was the man who taught her how to love and also the man who taught her how to let go. Rocco held the photograph in his hand, his finger drifting gently over Harper's face as if he could touch her through time. Years. She'd kept this picture for years. While he'd tried to forget her with whiskey and work, she had still looked at him every night. He didn't know if that was supposed to comfort him or make the pain cut deeper. The letter, Nora reminded him, holding the envelope out again. Mom said this was the most important thing. Mom made me promise I'd put it in your hand, that I couldn't lose it. Rocco set the photo down beside him, then took the envelope. It felt weightless in his hand, nothing but paper and ink, yet he had the sense he was holding a bomb. There was no name on the front, only a small black rose drawn in the corner, their symbol, their secret. He turned it over and saw it had been sealed carefully, but there was no wax stamp. Harper hadn't had the strength for those delicate details in her final days. He opened the envelope and pulled out the pages inside. Cheap notebook paper, the kind torn from a spiral-bound pad, but the handwriting made him stop breathing. He recognized it instantly. The soft curves, the small circles she used instead of dots over the letter I. The way the letters slanted to the right as if they were running toward the future. This was Harper's writing. The writing he'd read on hundreds of little notes she'd left on his pillow, on the kitchen table, in the pocket of his coat. Notes he had burned after that fateful night because he couldn't bear to look at them. His hand trembled as he began to read. Rocco, if Nora is handing you this letter, it means I'm gone. Don't blame her for finding you. I taught her too well. Maybe even better than anything you ever taught me. You're probably wondering how I'm still alive, how I got out that night. The answer is simpler than you think. The killer you hired had a conscience. Funny, isn't it? In our world, where compassion is seen as a deadly weakness, you ended up hiring the only murderer left who still knew mercy. Frankie the Shadow, the man you trusted most. The one you paid $200,000 to end my life. Turns out, he still had a piece of humanity somewhere beneath the shell of a cold-blooded assassin. Rocco stopped breathing fast. Frankie, his most reliable hitman, the man he'd handed the most important, most painful job of his life. And Frankie had deceived him. For years, he kept reading, his eyes moving over each line of shaky but still clear handwriting. That night, Frankie arrived exactly as planned. I was in the safe apartment you arranged, naive enough to think you'd sent someone to protect me. When I saw the gun, I understood everything. I understood you had chosen, and I didn't blame you. Even then, I didn't blame you. I understood your world had no room for weakness, but Frankie didn't shoot me. He stood there, gun aimed at my head, his finger on the trigger. I closed my eyes and waited, but the gunshot never came. When I opened my eyes, Frankie was looking at me with a strange expression. He asked if I was pregnant. I didn't understand why he was asking. I said no. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You remind me of my sister. She had red hair like that too. She was killed by her boyfriend because she knew too much." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there waiting for my fate. Then Frankie did something I never could have imagined. He put the gun down, walked outside, and came back with a body. A homeless person he found in an alley nearby. Dead from the cold or from drugs. I don't know. Frankie fired 3 shots into that body. Then he burned it, swapped dental records. He did everything clean and professional, the way he always did with other targets. After that, he turned to me and said, "You've got minutes to disappear. Don't contact anyone. Don't come back to this city. If I see you again, I'll finish the job. This time, there won't be an exception." I didn't need to hear it twice. I ran without looking back. Ran until my legs couldn't carry me anymore. Rocco let the pages fall into his lap. His hands were shaking violently. Frankie, the man he trusted completely. The man he'd paid generously and never once suspected. The man who had handed him photographs of a burned, unrecognizable body and sworn the job was done. It had all been a lie that lasted years, and somehow that lie had saved Harper's life, had given her a new life, had created the child sitting in front of him now. He didn't know whether to thank Frankie or hate him. Rocco drew a deep breath, fighting to steady the trembling in his hands. He gathered the pages again and kept reading. He had to know. He had to know how she had lived through the years he believed she was dead. I ran all night. I had nothing with me except the clothes on my back and a little cash I'd hidden in my bra. I learned that in the years I spent on the streets before I met you. Always have a plan B. Always have money to run. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to go far. As far from New York as possible, as far from you as possible. I jumped freight trains, hitched rides with truckers, walked when I had no other choice. I changed my name, changed my hair color, changed everything I could change. I became someone else, or at least I tried to become someone else. Weeks later, I stopped in a small town called Ashland, Oregon. I chose it for no reason at all, just because when I stepped off the bus, I saw a little cafe with a sign on the door that said, "Help Wanted." I was hungry, exhausted, and I didn't have the strength to run anymore. So I walked in and asked for a job. The owner was a man named Wyatt Quinn, a widower, older, with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. He didn't ask where I came from. He didn't ask why a young woman who looked half dead had shown up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. He only asked if I knew how to make coffee. I said yes. He said I was hired. That was how my new life began. Rocco paused, picturing Harper in a small cafe in Oregon, the girl who had lived in his penthouse, who had worn the most expensive jewelry, who had been sheltered by an entire empire. Now she was standing behind a counter serving customers, making coffee 1 cup at a time for minimum wage. And maybe she'd been happier. That thought sent a sharp ache through his chest. Wyatt wasn't like any man I'd ever met. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't mysterious. He didn't have dark secrets hiding behind his smile. He was just a good man who'd lost his wife to cancer earlier and was trying to keep living one day at a time. He saw the pain in my eyes, and I saw the pain in his. We understood each other without needing explanations. Two broken people who happened to meet in a small cafe in a town no one had ever heard of. Wyatt never asked about my past. He never pushed me to tell him what I didn't want to tell him. He was simply there every day, patient, waiting, giving me time to heal, to trust, to learn how to live again. Only a few months after I came to Ashland, Wyatt proposed. No diamond ring, no fancy dinner, just him, me, and a simple silver ring he made himself from an old coin. He asked if I wanted to build a new life with him. I said yes. I didn't love Wyatt the way I loved you. Rocco, I need you to know that my love for you was a fire, intense, burning, and in the end, it scorched both of us. My love for Wyatt was a candle, warm, gentle, enough to light the dark days. Different, but both were love. Nora was born less than a year after the wedding. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. When I held her for the first time, I understood why I had to live, why Frankie spared me, why I had to run, to endure, to start over from nothing. It was all for this moment, to look into my daughter's eyes and see a future. I named her Nora. It means life, because she was proof that I was still alive, that I hadn't died that night, that something good could grow out of the ashes of tragedy. Rocco looked over at Nora. She sat in silence, her blue eyes watching every expression on his face. Life. Harper had named her child Life, and that was exactly what she was. Sitting here in this luxurious room filled with shadows, Nora was like a small candle burning. He turned back to the letter. We had years of happiness, years of the most peaceful life I ever knew. Wyatt, Nora, the little cafe, and a house with a garden behind it. I grew roses, Rocco. Red roses, not black. I wanted to see color. I wanted to believe in brighter things. Then the accident happened years ago. Wyatt went out to deliver an order for a regular customer in the next town. The road was slick from rain. A truck lost control. Wyatt never came home. I got the news while I was picking Nora up from preschool. I didn't cry. Not in front of her. I carried her home, fed her, put her to bed. Then I went into the bathroom, turned the faucet on as loud as it would go, and screamed until no sound could come out anymore. I lost him. The man who saved me from the darkness. The man who gave me a new life. The man who loved me without questions, without judgment, without demands. After that, it was only me and Nora, and I swore I would live for my child. Rocco turned to the next page. The lines of handwriting began to tremble more, to slant more. He knew this part was written when Harper had grown much weaker, when the pen in her hand felt heavier than it ever had before, but she still wrote. She still wanted him to know. Rocco, I know what you're thinking. As you read this, you're wondering if I hated you, if I cursed you every night, if I ever wished you were dead. The answer is yes, I did once in the first years after I escaped. I hated you with everything I had. I hated you for not believing me. I hated you for choosing your empire instead of choosing me. I hated you for turning me into someone who had to run in the night, who had to look over her shoulder every time she went outside, who had to wake up drenched in cold sweat from nightmares about a gunshot that never came. I hated you so much that there were nights I lay awake thinking about how to go back to New York and kill you. I imagined every detail, how I would slip into your restaurant, how I would stand in front of you and let you see I was alive before I pulled the trigger, how your eyes would go wide with shock and pain. Those thoughts were the only thing that kept me alive through the darkest months. But then I met Wyatt. Then I had Nora. Then I looked in the mirror and saw a different woman. No longer the young girl on the streets of Brooklyn, no longer the mistress of a mafia boss, no longer the victim of betrayal. I was a mother. I was a wife. I was the co-owner of a small cafe in a town nobody knew. I was the woman who grew roses in the garden and baked on Sundays. I was someone new, and that new person had no room left for hate. You know, Rocco, hating someone is exhausting. It drains everything out of you. It clings to you like a leech, sucking away every bit of joy, every scrap of hope, every ability to move forward. I spent too many years hating you, too many nights thinking about you, too many tears crying over you. And then one day, I realized something so simple it hurt. If it hadn't been for that night, I wouldn't have this life. If you hadn't ordered me killed, Frankie wouldn't have spared me. I wouldn't have run. I wouldn't have come to Ashland. I wouldn't have met Wyatt. I wouldn't have Nora, my daughter, the most beautiful child in the world, wouldn't exist. Do you understand that? Your betrayal, the cruelest decision you ever made, became the thing that gave me the greatest gift of my life. You pushed me into darkness, and somehow I found light on the other side. I didn't forgive you because you deserved forgiveness. I forgave you because I needed to be free. Hate is an invisible chain that kept me tied to you, to the past, to the girl who was betrayed on a rainy night. I wanted to cut that chain. I wanted to live without carrying the weight of what happened. So I forgave you, not for you, for me. For Nora, for the life I built from the ashes of what you burned down. I'm free now, Rocco. And I hope one day you'll be free too. Rocco couldn't read any further. The words blurred, melted into meaningless streaks of ink. It took him a few seconds to understand. It wasn't because the ink had smudged. It was because his eyes were full of water. He was crying. Rocco Bianchi, the head of the Bianchi Empire, the man this entire city feared, was sitting on the floor among broken glass, crying like a child. He hadn't cried when his father was shot dead in front of him. He hadn't cried when he had to kill his first man. He hadn't cried when he received the photographs of the burned, unrecognizable body he believed was Harper. He had built a wall around his heart, high and thick, so strong he thought nothing could ever break through it. But that wall had just collapsed completely, all because of trembling words on cheap notebook paper. She forgave him. After everything he'd done, Harper forgave him. He didn't deserve it. He knew that. He'd ordered the murder of the woman he loved. He'd chosen power over love. He'd lived years in guilt and still had never dared to face it. He was a coward, a monster, everything that should be cursed. But Harper still forgave him. A small hand touched his shoulder. Rocco looked up through the curtain of tears and saw Nora. The girl didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hand resting on his shoulder, those sea-blue eyes watching him with an understanding far beyond her years. And Rocco kept crying, crying for Harper, crying for the years he'd lost, crying for the orphan child standing in front of him, crying for himself, For the young man who once believed in love before this world crushed it out of him. For the first time in years, Rocco Bianchi allowed himself to be human. Rocco sat there and let the tears fall until there was nothing left to fall, and in the hollow space, the tears left behind. Memory rushed in. Images from years ago rose up sharp and bright as if it had all happened yesterday, the night he met Harper for the first time. That year, Rocco was young, hot-tempered, and desperate to prove to his father that he deserved to inherit the Bianchi empire. He'd done everything his father demanded. He'd killed, he'd tortured enemies, he'd swallowed every emotion and turned himself into the perfect machine the family needed. But that night, he was in Brooklyn to handle a small job. A trafficking crew had dared to operate on Bianchi territory without permission, without paying protection. It was an insult that couldn't be tolerated. Rocco went to an abandoned warehouse with 4 of his men. He thought it would be an ordinary night. Kill a few of them, burn the warehouse, send a message to everyone else. But when he kicked the door open and stepped inside, he saw something that made his blood boil. Iron cage. Dozens of young girls locked inside like animals. Some were crying, some were curled up in corners. Some no longer reacted at all, their eyes empty like broken dolls. There were 6 traffickers. Rocco and his men killed them in less than minutes. Fast, clean, merciless. No witnesses left behind. When the gunfire stopped, Rocco ordered his men to open the cages and call someone to clean up. He didn't care about the girls. That wasn't his problem. He'd come to deal with the ones who'd violated his territory, not to play hero. He turned to leave, and then a voice cut through the air. "You're really just going to walk away." Rocco turned back. In the last cage, a girl stood with her shoulder against the bars, staring at him, hair red as fire, even though it was filthy and tangled, so thin you could count her ribs through the torn fabric of her shirt. Her face was bruised, but those blue eyes weren't afraid. They held Rocco in a hard, defiant stare, as if she hadn't just watched him kill 6 men in minutes. "What did you say?" Rocco asked, stepping closer. "I asked if you're really just going to walk away," the girl repeated, her voice but steady. "Kill them and leave just leave us here. No police, no hospital. Just clean up the bodies and disappear like we don't exist." Rocco studied her, surprised. No one spoke to him in that tone. No one looked him straight in the eye as if he were just an ordinary man. "Do you know who I am?" The girl curled her mouth into a smile with no humor in it. "I don't care who you are. I just see a killer who's about to leave after he's finished his work." Rocco stepped up to the cage and looked down at her. She was nearly a head shorter than him. So thin a strong wind could have carried her off, but she stood straight. She didn't step back. She didn't bow her head. "How old are you?" Rocco asked. "Young. What's your name?" "Harper. Harper Quinn. Not because I have to answer when you ask. Because I want you to know the name of the person you're about to leave behind." Something strange rose in Rocco's chest. Not anger, not irritation, curiosity, and something that felt almost like admiration. This girl had been locked in a cage like an animal, had witnessed killing up close, and she was still standing there scolding him, still demanding the respect she believed she deserved. "You're not afraid of me?" Rocco asked. "I've just been kidnapped, locked up for days without food or water, and almost sold across the ocean as a slave," Harper answered, those blue eyes never leaving his. "What else do you think there is left to scare me?" Rocco unlocked the cage, not because he wanted to save her, but because he wanted to understand her. He wanted to know what could create a creature like this, strong enough not to break even when the whole world tried to crush her. "Come with me," he said. "I'll take you somewhere safe." Harper stepped out of the cage, but she didn't take the hand he offered. "I don't need anyone to save me. I can save myself." And Rocco, for the first time in his life, truly laughed. "I believe you," he said, "but let me help anyway." That night, Rocco took Harper back to his penthouse, not with bad intentions. He just didn't know where else to bring her. A young girl with no family, no home, nothing but torn clothes and those blue eyes full of defiance. He meant to let her stay a few days until he could find somewhere more suitable. But a few days became a few weeks. A few weeks became a few months. And then he no longer wanted to let her go. Harper wasn't like anyone Rocco had ever met. She wasn't afraid of him. She didn't try to please him. She didn't flatter him or look for ways to use him the way other women had come and gone in his life. She was simply herself, honest to the point of cruelty, stubborn to the point of madness, and beautiful in a way he'd never seen anyone else be beautiful. She was the only person who dared to tell him he was wrong. Rocco still remembered the first time it happened. He'd come home from a bloody job, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to his hands. He told her what had happened without hiding anything, without dressing it up. He thought she would be scared, that she would finally see him as the monster he was and run. But Harper only looked at him, those blue eyes deep and steady, and asked, "Did you have to kill that man, or did you kill him because you wanted to?" No one had ever asked Rocco that. No one dared. He could have killed her for that disrespect. But instead, he sat down and truly thought, for the first time about what he did. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I don't know anymore." And Harper didn't judge him. She didn't condemn him. She just sat beside him and said, "When you do know, tell me." From that night on, everything changed. Rocco began to see the world through Harper's eyes. He began to question things he'd always taken for granted. She didn't try to change him. She only showed him that he could change himself if he wanted to, that beneath the shell of a cold-blooded killer, there was still a human being trying to find his way out. Years passed like a dream. Rocco taught Harper how to read because she'd never been allowed to go to school. She taught him how to feel because he'd forgotten how a long time ago they fought many times. Harper shouted through things, said the cruelest words she could find. Rocco slammed his fist on tables, growled, threatened, but they always came back to each other. Always found a way to heal because no matter how angry they were, they couldn't imagine life without the other. The tattoo night was Harper's idea. She wanted something that belonged only to the two of them. Not a ring, not a necklace, something no one could ever take away. "A black rose," she said, sketching it on paper. "Because I'm your rose and black, because we both belong to the darkness." Rocco agreed without hesitation. They found an old tattoo artist in Brooklyn, the same man who had tattooed Rocco's father many years earlier. In a cramped room thick with ink and antiseptic, they lay side by side, hand in hand, while the needle carved their symbol into their skin. It hurt, but it was the kind of pain Rocco was willing to endure, because from that night on, he and Harper would carry each other's mark on their bodies forever. The proposal came months later on a pier at sunset. Rocco went down on one knee, his hand trembling as he opened a red velvet box. He'd faced dozens of guns aimed at his head without shaking. But now, in front of a red-haired girl with eyes as blue as the sea, he trembled like a child. "Will you be with me?" he asked, his voice rough. "Not because I can give you a good life, but because I can't live without you." Harper looked at him, tears sliding down her cheeks, but she smiled, that one-sided smile he loved like madness. "Do you know what true love is?" she asked. Rocco shook his head. Harper knelt in front of him, lifted his face in both hands, and looked straight into his eyes. "True love never dies," she said, her voice like an oath. "It just waits." Then she kissed him, and Rocco, for the first time in his life, believed he deserved to be loved. But every dream ends eventually, and Rocco's dream ended on a rainy night years after the proposal on the pier, the night he was forced to make the cruelest choice of his life. The Lombardi family had been enemies of the Bianchis for 3 generations. They controlled the docks, monopolized the smuggling routes from Europe. Rocco's father had fought them. Rocco's grandfather had fought them. And now Rocco decided to end the war once and for all, not with negotiation, not with a deal, but by wiping the entire Lombardi family off the map. The plan was perfect. Rocco spent months preparing, bribing someone on the inside, gathering information, building a schedule down to the minute. The following Saturday night, when the entire Lombardi family gathered at their mansion on Long Island for the birthday of Victor Lombardi, Sr., Rocco's men would strike fast, clean, leaving no one behind, ending 3 generations of hatred in a single night. Harper discovered the plan by accident. She overheard Rocco speaking with Gino in his office. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was only walking past and the door wasn't fully closed. But what she heard changed everything. "Leave no one," Rocco said, his voice cold as ice. "Even the women and the children. We can't leave seeds behind." Harper froze outside the door. Women and children. Rocco, the man she loved, the man who had saved her from traffickers, was planning to kill women and children. She knew his world was dark. She'd accepted that long ago, but this was a line she couldn't cross. That night, when Rocco came back to the bedroom, Harper was waiting. She sat on the bed, spine straight, blue eyes burning with anger. "I know your plan," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I heard everything." Rocco stopped in the doorway. His face showed no emotion. "What did you hear? You're going to kill their entire family, the women, the children. You're going to turn yourself into a monster." Rocco walked into the room and closed the door behind him. "This is war, Harper. In war, there are no innocent people and the children." Harper stood and stepped closer. What did the children do? Did they get to choose the family they were born into? Did they get to choose their parents? If we let them live, they'll grow up and take revenge. The cycle will never end. So, you kill them to end the cycle. Harper gave a bitter laugh. "Do you hear yourself? You're justifying killing children." Rocco grabbed her shoulders and looked straight into her eyes. "You don't understand. This is how this world works. Kill or be killed. If I don't do it, they'll do it to my family. Then find another way." Harper screamed, tears starting to fall. "Only kill the guilty. Spare the innocent. You saved me once, remember? I was innocent too, dragged into this world. If that night you decided to kill everyone in that warehouse, I wouldn't be standing here." Rocco went silent. He had no answer to that because Harper was right. If he'd followed the logic of leave no one behind from the start, she would have died years ago. "Please." Harper took his hand, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't become the thing you hate. You can still choose differently." Rocco looked at her, his heart shattering. He wanted to agree, to cancel the plan, to do anything to keep her smile, but he couldn't. Too many people already knew. Too much money had been poured into it. Too much was hanging on this plan. If he backed out now, he would lose everything. The respect of his men, his power, the empire his father and grandfather had built. "I can't," he said, his voice like a sigh. Harper stepped back, blue eyes full of disappointment and pain. "Then I can't stay silent either," she said, her voice turning cold. "I'll go to the FBI. I'll tell them everything. I won't let you kill innocent children." Rocco's world collapsed in that moment. She was threatening him. Harper, the woman he loved more than his own life, was threatening to betray him, threatening to destroy everything he'd built. And he knew she meant it. Harper never made empty threats. She was a woman who did what she said she would do. That was one of the things he loved most about her, and now it was the thing that would get her killed. Rocco left the room without another word. He went downstairs and called Frankie. His voice didn't shake. He didn't hesitate, because if he hesitated, he wouldn't be able to do it. "Handle her," he said. 3 words. Short. Cold. Tonight. Clean. Then he hung up, and he sat there in the dark, not daring to look up at the stairs, not daring to think about Harper upstairs, still waiting for him to come back, not daring to face what he had just done. He had ordered the death of the woman he loved, and he didn't have the courage to look into her eyes one last time. The memory dissolved like mist when Rocco heard Nora's voice. He came back to the present, sitting on the restaurant floor among broken glass, Harper's pages still in his hands. His eyes were still red, tear tracks not yet dry on his cheeks. In front of him, the 7-year-old girl with red hair and blue eyes watched him closely, waiting with the patience of someone who seemed to have an entire lifetime to wait. You're crying because of my mom, aren't you? Nora asked gently. Rocco nodded, not bothering to hide it. He was tired of hiding, tired of wearing masks. This child had brought him the truth. The least he could do was answer with truth. You and my mom. Nora sat down across from him, legs folded, hands resting on her knees. What happened between you two? Rocco looked at her. 7 years old. She was only 7. Should he tell a 7-year-old about betrayal? About ordering someone killed? About the brutal choices adults were sometimes forced to make? But then he remembered what Harper had written in her letter. She had told Nora everything. She hadn't hidden the past from her daughter. So what right did he have to lie? What did your mom tell you? Rocco asked instead. She told me she once loved a very powerful man, Nora replied, her voice steady like she was reciting a story she'd heard many times. Mom said he loved her, but one day he had to choose between her and his work. He chose his work, and Mom had to leave. Just that Mom said the details don't matter. What matters is what happened after. Rocco swallowed hard. Harper had given her daughter a softer version. She hadn't said that work meant killing. She hadn't said that had to leave meant running for her life. She'd protected him even while telling the story of his betrayal. She didn't tell you the whole truth. Rocco sighed. What happened was much worse. I know, Nora said, surprising him. I know there are things Mom didn't say, but I also know Mom didn't lie. She just chose to tell the parts I needed to hear. Rocco studied the child, stunned by an intelligence far beyond her years. She had Harper's mind, that ability to see the heart of something without needing every detail. Do you want to know the truth? Rocco asked, his voice low. The truth about what I did to your mother? Nora thought for a moment, then shook her head. I only want to know one thing. She looked straight into his eyes. Do you regret it? Rocco felt as if a knife had been driven into his chest. A question so simple it was cruel, and the answer was even crueler. Every day, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Every hour, every minute since that night, I did the worst thing you can do to someone you love. I chose power instead of choosing her. I gave the order. He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. I thought I killed her. Nora fell silent for a long moment. Rocco waited. He waited for fear, for disgust, for her to stand up and run from him, from this room, from the monster who had tried to kill her mother. But Nora did none of that. She only tilted her head slightly, blue eyes watching him with something that looked like pity. Mom told me about that, Nora said softly. Mom said you made a terrible decision, but Mom also said something else. What? Mom said you didn't kill her. Nora paused as if she were choosing each word carefully. Mom said you set her free. Rocco stared at the child, not understanding. Set her free. He had ordered Harper killed, forced her to run in the night, driven her into exile, into changing her name, changing her life, living in fear. How could that be called freedom? Mom said. If it hadn't been for that night, she would have never left you. Nora continued, her voice light as air. Mom loved you too much to walk away on her own. She would have stayed, would have sunk into the darkness with you, would have become what she didn't want to become, but you pushed her away, and in that way, you gave her a chance to live a different life. Rocco felt as if someone had switched on a light inside the dark room he'd been living in for years. A new perspective, a new understanding, a truth he'd never dared to consider. Rocco wanted to argue. He wanted to say there was no way to turn betrayal into something noble. He wanted to say he was a sinner, not a savior. But Nora's words kept echoing in his head, drilling into the corners he deliberately tried to forget for years. Did my mom say anything else? He asked, his voice raw. Nora nodded. She pulled her legs up and hugged her knees, looking smaller than ever. Yet her gaze stayed steady like an adult's. Mom said life is like a tapestry. There are black threads and white threads. If you only look at the black thread, you'll think the whole tapestry is black. But if you step back, you'll see the whole picture. And sometimes the black threads are what make the white threads stand out. Rocco stared at her, stunned. Those were Harper's words. She had taught her daughter how to look at life through the eyes of someone who had walked through darkness and still found light. She had passed down a kind of wisdom many people never reach in an entire lifetime. Maybe your bad choice created good things, Nora continued, her voice gentle but certain. If you hadn't done that, Mom wouldn't have met Dad Wyatt. There wouldn't be me. There wouldn't be those happy years in Oregon. There wouldn't be a rose garden and Sunday mornings baking. She paused and tilted her head at him. Do you understand? Sometimes the worst thing leads to the best thing, not because the worst thing was right, but because life finds a way to grow out of the wreckage. Rocco couldn't speak. A 7-year-old had just said what he, with years of life behind him. With years in the underworld, with countless lessons about power and survival, had never been able to understand. For years he had drowned in guilt. He had stared at that night as a stain that could never be washed away. He cursed himself every night, tortured himself with dreams of Harper, locked himself inside the prison of regret. But he had never considered this, never dared to imagine that something beautiful could rise from his betrayal, that Harper could find happiness, that she could love someone else, build a family, have a child, that her life could become better, not in spite of what he did, but because he'd done the cruelest thing imaginable. You're so smart, Rocco whispered, just like your mom. Mom said, I'm more like you, Nora replied, a small smile flickering across her mouth. Mom said the Quinn women are strong, but your family is smart. Mom said, you can see 3 steps ahead while everyone else is still stuck on the first step. Rocco felt a sharp ache in his chest. Harper had talked about him to her daughter. She had described him not as a betrayer, but as a man she had once loved. She had kept his image from becoming pure darkness in Nora's eyes. Your mom was extraordinary, he said, his voice breaking. I know, Nora answered simply. Then she went quiet, her blue eyes dropping to the floor. When she looked up again, Rocco saw the first flicker of fear appear in her gaze. The fear of a 7-year-old who had just lost her mother, sitting in a strange room with a strange man, not knowing what would happen next. Are you going to send me away? The simple question struck Rocco like a knife straight into his heart. She'd traveled 3,000 meters alone. She'd carried her mother's letters and secrets. She'd faced him, told him the truth, endured his tears and his memories. And now, after all of it, she was afraid of being rejected, afraid the man her mother had sent her to would turn his back, push her out the door, leave her alone in the world. Rocco stood, stepped in front of Nora, then lowered himself to one knee again so his eyes were level with hers. He placed both hands on her shoulders, feeling how thin and fragile she was beneath that light coat. No, he said, steadier than anything he'd ever said in his life. I'm never going to send you away. You're family, and family never abandons each other. Nora looked at him, blue eyes shining. You promise? I promise. Rocco said, true love never dies. It just waits. And for the first time since she'd walked into that room, Nora cried. Rocco wrapped his arms around the little girl and let Nora cry into his shoulder. Her small body trembled in his embrace, the muffled sound of her sobs filling the quiet room. This was the first time Nora had allowed herself to be weak since her mother died. For days she'd had to be strong, had to handle everything on her own, had to cross an entire country alone carrying the weight of secrets and promises. Now in the arms of the man her mother had entrusted her to, she could finally let go. Rocco didn't say anything. He only held her and let her cry until there were no tears left. He remembered Harper crying like this, too. In the first nights after he brought her to the penthouse, when memories of the iron cage came crashing back, he'd held her the same way, silent, patient, until the storm passed. When Nora finally calmed down, she leaned back and wiped her tears with her sleeve. I'm sorry, she said, her voice still thick. I didn't mean to cry. You don't have to apologize, Rocco replied softly. Crying doesn't mean you're weak. Your mom used to tell me that too. Nora nodded. Then, as if she suddenly remembered something, she slipped her hand into her coat pocket. There's one more thing, she said, pulling out a small wooden box. Old, its surface worn smooth by time. Mom told me to give this to you. Mom said it belongs to you. Rocco stared at the box, his heart beating faster. He recognized it immediately. The red velvet box he'd bought from the most expensive jeweler in Manhattan, the box that held his promise to Harper on that pier at sunset. But the red velvet outside had faded, frayed, become something completely different from the luxury it once was. He took the box with trembling hands. It felt weightless and heavier than anything he'd ever held. He lifted the lid, and his heart skipped a beat. The ring was still there, the engagement ring he'd given Harper years ago. White gold, a small but flawless diamond in the center, and an inscription inside that only the two of them knew. Rocco lifted the ring out, turned it slowly between his fingers, and read the words carved into memory until the darkness ends. R and H. He'd chosen that line because it reflected what they were. Two people born from darkness, finding each other in darkness, loving each other in darkness. And he'd promised to stay with her until the darkness ended, until they found the light, until death separated them. But he'd broken that promise. He had become the darkness that swallowed her instead of protecting her from it. Your mom kept it for years? Rocco asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Nora nodded. Mom never wore it. But Mom never threw it away either. She kept it in the bedside drawer with the photo from the pier. Rocco closed his eyes, imagining Harper opening that drawer every night, looking at the ring in the photo, remembering the man who had once been everything to her. Even after she had Wyatt, even after she had built a new life, she still kept their keepsakes the way someone keeps a piece of herself. Did your mom ever need money? Rocco asked. During those years? Yes, Nora answered honestly. After Dad Wyatt died, the cafe couldn't cover everything. Mom had to sell a lot. Furniture, the car, even Mom's wedding ring with Dad Wyatt. She paused. But Mom never sold this ring. I asked why, and Mom said, "Some things can't be priced." Rocco felt as if someone was squeezing his heart until it couldn't breathe. Harper had been so broke she sold her wedding ring from the husband she'd lost. But she still kept his ring, the ring from the man who had tried to kill her. The ring that carried a promise he'd betrayed. Why? He whispered. The question not meant for Nora, but for Harper, for the universe, for anyone who could answer. Why did she keep it? Mom said this ring wasn't hers, Nora replied. Mom said she was only holding it, because one day it would need to go back to its true owner. Rocco looked down at the ring in his palm, small, bright, carrying years of memory and waiting. Harper hadn't kept it because she still loved him. She'd kept it because she knew one day he would need it. He would need to be reminded of who he once was, of the love he once had, of the promise he once swore. He slid the ring onto his pinky, the only finger small enough for it to fit. It fit snugly, as if it had never left. Thank you, he said to Nora. Thank you for bringing it back. Nora looked at the ring on Rocco's hand, then slipped her hand back into her coat pocket. There's one more letter, she said. Mom wrote it the night before she died. She told me I could only give you this one after you'd read the first letter and gotten the ring back. Rocco looked at the little girl, startled. Harper had planned everything. The order of each item, each letter, each piece of secrecy revealed. Even while she was fading, she still arranged everything perfectly, still controlled the story the way she wanted. Nora pulled out another envelope, newer, cleaner than the first. White paper, no black rose, no decoration at all. Only Rocco's name scrolled on the front in trembling handwriting, far weaker than the letter before. Rocco took the envelope and felt its weight, lighter than the first letter. But by instinct, he knew what was inside would be heavier, many times over. He opened it and drew out the pages, only 3 sheets. The handwriting wavered, slanted, and in places it was almost impossible to read, as if the writer had used every last ounce of strength just to finish. Rocco, this is the last letter I'm writing. I'm writing it on the night I know I won't make it through tomorrow. My body has given up, but there are things I have to say before I go. Things I kept out of the first letter because I needed you to understand my story before I revealed this part. I didn't only run, Rocco. I know what you've thought about me for years. You thought I was a victim, a weak girl pushed into darkness who got lucky and survived. A woman who ran, hid, lived an ordinary life in a small town no one had ever heard of. But you were wrong. I fought in my own way, in a way you never would have imagined. Do you remember why I threatened to go to the FBI that night? Because you were going to kill the entire Lombardi family, including innocent women and children. I couldn't accept that. I believed there was another way to win without becoming a monster. And I was right. There was another way. I've spent the last years proving it. Rocco stopped and read that last line again. Harper had fought another way. He didn't understand. She lived in Oregon, worked in a cafe, raised a child alone. How had she fought? He kept reading, his heart beating faster with every line. The Lombardi family is still operating, Rocco. After that night, after I disappeared and you canceled the attack plan, they kept doing what they've always done. Human trafficking, drugs, money laundering, ruining the lives of innocent people. I know because I watched them. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? A woman on the run living in a small town M from New York. How could she possibly keep track of a powerful mafia family? But the world is smaller than you think, and the internet is a beautiful thing if you know how to use it. I started with small things. Reading the news, tracking cases connected to them, searching for people who once worked for them and escaped. I found one, Rocco, a man who used to be the accountant for Victor Lombardi Sr. He ran after he watched them kill a family over a small debt. He was living off the grid in Montana, afraid every day, not knowing who to trust. I contacted him. It took months before he trusted me. And when he did, he told me everything. Every transaction, every number, every name. He had records, Rocco. Records he copied before he ran because he knew one day he'd need them to protect himself. I didn't stop there. I kept searching, kept collecting. Every small piece of information, I wrote it down. Every piece of evidence, I stored it. I built a complete file on the Lombardi family over the last years, enough to bury them, enough to put them in prison for the rest of their lives, enough to end everything without a single bullet. Rocco let the pages sink down, unable to believe what he just read. Harper, the woman he thought had run away and lived a quiet life, had spent years collecting evidence against the enemy of them both. She wasn't weak. She hadn't given up. She had fought in her own way, a way he, with all his power and guns, had never once thought of. She had proved that you could win without becoming a monster. He looked at Nora, his eyes full of shock and something that felt like respect. "Did you know about this?" he asked. "About what your mom did?" Nora nodded. "Mom told me when she started getting weaker," she said. "Mom said someone needed to know in case she couldn't finish. A new world, a new Harper. He'd never a new world, a new Harper he'd never known." I didn't do it alone, Rocco. I'm not crazy enough to think I could take on the Lombardi with nothing but a few bits of information gathered from the internet. I needed someone inside the system, someone with the power to act, someone clean, someone who couldn't be bought. I found her. Her name is Jordan Hayes, an FBI agent, older. She spent years trying to build a case against the Lombardi, but never had enough evidence. She's clean, Rocco. Truly clean. The rare kind of person who believes in justice and is willing to fight for it, even if it cost her career. I contacted her for the first time years ago, anonymous through an email address that couldn't be traced. I sent her one small piece of information about a Lombardi drug shipment. She checked it, found it was accurate, and wrote back. I sent more. She checked more. That's how it went, piece by piece, building trust with her. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know where I was. She didn't know why I was doing this. I kept my distance because I knew in this world, trusting someone completely can mean death. But I trusted her enough to keep working with her. And she trusted me enough not to try to trace my source. Years. Rocco. Years that Jordan Hayes and I quietly built the biggest organized crime case in the history of the East Coast. Every piece of information I sent, she verified and filed. Every name I gave, she investigated and confirmed. We have everything. Drug transactions, human trafficking, murders, money laundering through dozens of shell companies, bribing officials, all of it. But I didn't give her everything. I kept the most important pieces. The evidence that can end the Lombardi is for good. I kept it because I wanted you to make the final decision. Rocco stopped and took a deep breath. His mind spun under the weight of too much information. Harper had done all of this, while he sat in a lavish restaurant drinking expensive whiskey and torturing himself with guilt. She had quietly built a bomb that could destroy the enemy he'd fought his whole life. He kept reading. In Nora's coat pocket there is a USB drive, small, no bigger than a thumb. But inside it is years of my work, everything. Names, dates, locations, amounts, photos, copies of contracts, recorded phone calls, security camera footage I hacked, statements from people who escaped the Lombardi, enough to bury Victor Lombardi Sr. and his entire family, enough to put them in prison for the rest of their lives, enough to end 3 generations of crime without spilling a single drop of blood. But I didn't give it to Jordan Hayes. I gave it to you because you have a choice, Rocco. You always have. That night, you chose. Right or wrong, you chose what you thought you had to. Now I want you to choose again. You have 2 options. 1, destroy the USB drive. Burn it, crush it, throw it into the Hudson River. Keep everything the way it is. Continue the war with the Lombardi the way you always have. With guns, with blood, with endless death. Keep being the Rocco Bianchi this world knows. 2, give the USB drive to Jordan Hayes. Let the law do its job. Let the Lombardis fall not from your bullet, but from their own crimes. Choose the path I always believed you could take. Prove there is another way. That you don't have to be a monster to win. I'm not telling you what to choose. I don't have that right. I only want you to know you have a choice. You always do. That's what you taught me when you opened that iron cage years ago. You said you didn't need to save me. You only gave me a choice. Now I'm giving that gift back to you. But Rocco, there's something I need you to understand. If you choose option 2, if you give the evidence to the FBI, the investigation may spread. It may reach things you don't want touched. The Bianchi family isn't completely clean. You know that. I know that. I can't promise you'll be safe. I can't promise everything will be fine. I can only promise that no matter what you choose, I won't judge you because I've already forgiven you. Remember, I'm free now. And I want you to be free too. Take care of Nora. Not because I'm asking, but because she deserves to be loved. She is the best thing I'm leaving behind in this world. And if you love me, even a little, love my daughter, love you always, wherever I am now. Harper P.S. Jordan. Hayes's number is 917-553-728. She's waiting for a call from someone named Rocco. I warned her that her source would be sending someone. She's ready. Rocco folded the letter and set it down beside him. His mind was spinning, his heart pounding out of rhythm. Harper had left him more than letters and a ring. She had left him a bomb, a weapon with more destructive power than any gun he'd ever held. The USB, he said, his voice rough. Do you have it? Nora nodded. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat, the safest place a 7-year-old could think of, and pulled out a small black USB drive. Nothing special, no sticker, no label, no identifying mark, just an ordinary storage device anyone could buy in an electronic store for a few dollars. But inside, it was years of Harper's life. Years of gathering, investigating, building, years of fighting quietly while the world believed she had simply run away. Rocco took the USB and felt its weight in his palm. Light in the physical sense, heavy as a mountain in meaning. He stared at it, turned it slowly between his fingers, and thought about the 2 paths Harper had laid out for him. Destroy it. Simple, quick. He could snap the USB in half right now, toss it into a fire, and keep living as if none of this had ever happened. Keep being Rocco Bianchi, boss of the most powerful family on the East Coast. Keep fighting the Lombardi the way he always had, with bullets, with blood, with deaths that never ended. Or hand it to the FBI. Let the law take the Lombardis down. Let them fall not because of his gun, but because of their own crimes. But that road had a price. Harper had made that clear. The investigation could spread. It could reach secrets he wanted buried. The Bianchis weren't clean. His hands had been stained too many times to stand comfortably in the light of justice. If he gave the USB to Agent Hayes, the Lombardi would fall, but the Bianchis could be dragged down with them. The empire his father, his grandfather, and he himself had spent a lifetime building could dissolve into smoke. Everything he had fought to protect, everything he had sacrificed to hold on to could vanish inside a single investigation. Rocco stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city at night. New York glittered below, millions of lights like stars that had fallen to the ground. This city belonged to him. Every street, every shadowed corner, every dock. He had spilled blood to control it, killed to protect it, lost Harper because of it, and now she was asking him to place it all on the scales. "What are you thinking?" Nora's voice came from behind him. Rocco didn't turn around. He kept staring out the window. The USB clenched tight in his hand. "I'm thinking about choices," he said, "and the price of them." "Mom said the right choice is usually the hardest one," Nora said softly. "Mom said if a decision feels too easy, maybe it isn't the right one." Rocco turned and looked at her. 7 years old, sitting in a luxurious room filled with darkness, carrying her mother's legacy and a wisdom far beyond her years. She wasn't forcing him toward any answer. She wasn't telling him what to do. She was only repeating what her mother had taught her and leaving him to decide. "What do you want me to choose?" Rocco asked. Nora shook her head. "I don't want you to choose anything. It's your decision." She paused, thinking. But Mom used to say one thing. The child with Harper's blue eyes sitting the child with Harper's blue eyes sitting in front of him. The person you love would be proud. What would Harper be proud of? The answer was so clear he didn't even have to think. She'd spent years building this path. She'd chosen law over violence. She'd proved there was another way, and she'd sent him the chance to walk it. But did he have the courage? Rocco didn't have time to think any further. The information about someone watching them hit him like a bucket of ice water, yanking him out of every thought about choices in the future. Victor Lombardi Jr., the scar on his left cheek, the gold tooth. That man had been watching Harper in her final weeks, and now he could be out there somewhere, watching this restaurant, watching Nora. Rocco pulled out his phone and dialed Gino. It rang for a moment before the man on the other end picked up. "Boss raised security highest level right now," Rocco said, his voice cold and sharp as steel. This was the voice of the Mafia boss, not the voice of the man who had just cried over a letter from the woman he once loved. "What happened?" Gino asked, his tone tight. "Lombardi, they might be watching us this second." "Must out." Rocco walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and looked down at the street below. "Check for any unfamiliar vehicles parked around here, especially anything that's been sitting there since about hours ago when the kid arrived." A brief silence. Gino's voice barking orders to someone on his end. Then Gino came back, tighter than before. "There's a black SUV parked at the end of the block across the street. It's been there since the kid showed up. Tinted windows, can't see inside." Rocco clenched the phone. Exactly what he feared. The Lombardi hadn't just watched Harper in Oregon. They'd followed Nora the whole way from Oregon to New York, not to strike, but to use her as a tracker. They waited for her to lead them directly to me, hoping to reclaim the USB and eliminate the Bianchi name in one final blow. And they'd stayed close like vultures waiting for prey to finally collapse. "How many?" Rocco asked. "Can't confirm, but if it's Lombardi, they never travel alone. Call in more men. Everyone who can get here within minutes. Lock down every entrance and exit. No one in or out without my permission." Rocco paused and glanced at Nora sitting silently, blue eyes fixed on him with worry. "And Gino, prep the armored car in case we need to move fast." "Understood, boss. Anything else?" "The girl." Rocco lowered his voice. "She's priority number one. If anything happens, protect her at all costs, even if it means you sacrifice me." A long silence. Gino had never heard Rocco say anything like that. In years working together, his boss had always been the most important thing. Rocco's life was the absolute priority. Nothing was allowed to come above it. But now, a 7-year-old girl with red hair and blue eyes had changed everything. I understand, Gino said, his voice serious. I'll do it. Rocco ended the call and turned back to Nora. She was curled up on the chair, eyes wide. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming, but Rocco could see the fear underneath the calm she was trying to hold on to. They followed me here, didn't they? Nora asked, her voice small. Rocco didn't lie. She deserved the truth. Maybe, but you're safe here. No one can touch you. What do they want? The USB. Rocco looked down at the small device in his hand. They know your mom collected evidence against them. They watched her to figure out where she hid it. And when your mom died, they followed you, hoping you'd lead them to it. Nora went quiet for a moment, then asked, if you give them the USB, will they go away? Rocco knelt in front of her, looking straight into those blue eyes. No, they'll never go away. Whether I hand it over or not, they'll still want to erase every threat. And you, the daughter of the woman who built a case against them for years, are a threat in their eyes. Nora's eyes dimmed. She understood. She understood there was no running, no bargaining. The Lombardi wouldn't stop until she and everything tied to her mother was wiped out. Rocco stood, feeling the weight of the USB in his hand. The war he delayed for years. The war Harper had stopped that night by threatening the FBI. The war he'd left untouched because he'd lost the will after he lost her was knocking at his door now. Not because he wanted it, because the Lombardi had chosen this moment to strike. But this time, Rocco wouldn't fight the old way. This time, he would fight Harper's way. Rocco stood in the middle of the room, the pale yellow light falling across a face marked by time. Outside, the Lombardi were waiting. Inside, a 7-year-old child was watching him with the blue eyes of the woman he had once loved, and in his hand was a small USB drive holding years of Harper's hope and struggle. He looked at Nora, looked at the USB, looked at the ring on his pinky where the words, "Until the darkness ends," were still carved deep, a reminder that wouldn't fade. Harper had kept this ring for years. She hadn't sold it, even in poverty. She hadn't thrown it away, even after betrayal. She had kept it like a promise, like a faith that one day Rocco would choose right. And that day was today. Rocco pulled out his phone. His hand wasn't trembling anymore. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a strange calm. He had made his decision, not because he wasn't afraid of the consequences, but because he finally understood what Harper had been trying to tell him for years. There were things more important than power. There were things worth more than an empire. And the child sitting in front of him, the final legacy of the woman he loved, was one of them. He dialed the number Harper had left in the letter, 917-553-7208. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then someone answered. "Agent Hayes," a woman's voice said, sharp and professional. "Agent Hayes," Rocco said, steady. "This is Rocco Bianchi. I have something that belongs to you." Silence stretched for a few seconds. Rocco could hear the woman's breathing change on the other end of the line. Tighter, more focused. "My source said someone would contact me," Agent Hayes replied. "She didn't say it would be you. She's gone." Rocco said days ago, cancer. "But before she left, she gave me a gift. And I think you're the one who should receive it. You're talking about the USB. Years of evidence, enough to bury Lombardi for good." Rocco glanced at Nora. The girl was listening, her face serious. "Can you come to La Rosa in an hour? We need to meet in person." "I'll be there," Agent Hayes said without asking another question. "And Mr. Bianchi, thank you. She, my source, she said you would do the right thing. She believed in you." Rocco ended the call and felt as if someone had lifted an enormous stone off his chest. Harper had believed in him. Even after everything he had done, even after he had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible, she still believed that deep inside him there was a man worth saving. And tonight he would prove she was right. "You chose, didn't you?" Nora asked softly. Rocco nodded. "I chose. Mom would be proud of you. Rocco knelt in front of the girl and looked into those blue eyes deep as the sea. I don't know what the future will be, he admitted. I don't know where this decision will lead, but I know one thing. From now on, you'll never be alone again. No matter what happens, I'll be here for you, for your mom, for the love I once destroyed and now want to build again. Nora smiled, a one-sided smile exactly like Harper's. Mom was right about you, she said. Mom said you were a good man who got lost and one day you'd find your way home. Rocco pulled the child into his arms and felt her small, warm body against his chest. Outside, the Lombardi were still waiting. The war still wasn't over. But tonight, Rocco Bianchi had chosen a different road. The road Harper believed he could walk. The road of justice instead of violence. The road of redemption instead of destruction. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truth. Sometimes the courage of a child can change the entire world of a grown man. Sometimes real family never dies. It only finds a way back home. And sometimes true love never dies. It just waits. This story leaves us with many precious lessons. That forgiveness isn't a gift we give to someone else, but freedom we give ourselves. That the wrong choices of the past don't define who we are, but how we face them in the present is what matters. That family isn't only the people who share our blood, but the people willing to stand beside us when everything collapses. In real life, all of us face moments when we have to make difficult choices, moments when we have to face a painful past, moments when we need to find the strength to forgive others and ourselves. Rocco and Harper's story reminds us that no matter how thick the darkness becomes, light still finds a way through. We only have to be brave enough to open the door. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next emotional stories every day. We'd truly love to know how this story made you feel. Did it remind you of someone in your life? Did anything in this story make you reflect on yourself? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We always want to listen to what's held deep inside your heart. Wishing everyone watching this video strong health, a joyful life, and peaceful days. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.